Welcome to the Global Wellness HQ family of podcasts. We are your international headquarters for resources and ideas and insight in relation to the 9 elements of holistic wellness. Join us as we interview local and international wellness experts and learn how you can implement and improve one element or dimension of wellness at a time. Our experts will share their practical tips on wellness in one of these core areas: emotional, intellectual, occupational, physical, environmental, financial, spiritual, social, or habitual. We created our family of podcasts as a resource for anyone who is looking to integrate the 9 elements of holistic wellness into their daily lives. Welcome to the show. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited. I have my new friend, Mark Smeets, on the show today. Mark, why don't you tell us just a tiny little bit about yourself, and then we're going to jump in and talk about strength-based parenting.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeff, for having me. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am a parent. Actually, I should start with just self-declaring myself first. Um, I am ADHD, and our journey as a family started when our son was born 9 years ago, where we suspected he was autistic and had a whole bunch of confirmations that he was. Didn't quite get the original diagnosis when he was 4 years old, but finally 5 years later, as of April of 2023, we've confirmed that he actually is autistic, and just confirming what we already knew. But for all this time is we were just told, oh, it's just ADHD. And that was not the case because we knew better. And I call myself an advocate because that's exactly what we've had to do to sit there and fight to get that recognition and to fight for that diagnosis. And we know we're not alone as parents either. Outside of that, I am on the board of directors of the ADHD Advocacy Society of BC. And we're a relatively new nonprofit dedicated to smashing down a lot of those barriers and breaking those stigmas for ADHD. And on a side note, been a musician for 30 years, and I've got my own podcast. We are the ADHD family and the advocators, and that is our family's journey with everything that I just talked about.
I love it. And just to make it fun and for good measure, you also have 2 cats.
I do. Conan and Pebbles, who have now walked away from us.
Conan has left the building. All right. Well, he's left the room. So, um, now we were talking about, so you asked me a question about talking about disabilities, and I don't like the phrase disability because it implies deficit. I love the spin that you put on it, where you were talking about strength-based parenting. So let's start with that. Tell me what strength-based parenting means to you.
So it's a term, as I mentioned to you, I doubt I'm the one that came up with this. I just call it my term, and if somebody else has done it and copywritten it already, good for them. But what it really is about finding out what the strengths of your child are and how can you marry them with your own strengths or possibly your own challenges, and bring that together along as a cohesive family unit. Trust me, I can give you a ton of examples, and I don't want to dive into it because the ADHD person in me will be like, too much information, too much information. So I'm going to let you guide me on this where you want me to go. But that's essentially what it is. It's not looking at, it's not focusing on what your challenge is, or what the quote unquote deficit is, because the medical model is built on curing. It's built on deficits. It's what you don't have. It's that you're not normal, quote unquote. And that's wrong. That's not the way we should be looking at these things. And I don't even think the medical community should be looking at it that way, but that's another discussion for another day.
And I think that was where I got interested in, and I want to kind of dive a little deeper because way too many people focus on what they can't do. When I work with adults who are, successful in their field, most of them focused on their strengths, and they honed their strengths. If somebody's really naturally great at hockey, it's really weird to say, but you're terrible at curling. Well,
Mm.
in that case, why don't we let you play hockey and not force you to curl?
Yeah.
So what are some of the strengths you've discovered? And I love the fact that you talk about your family journey. What are some of the strengths you've discovered in ADHD for our listeners?
Well, this will be the tricky part. And I think the one thing I want to do is not get into sort of what's ADHD, what's autism. I mean, I can get into that, but part of the reason I didn't want to say I don't want to dive into that is because when we're the one big issue that the medical community has as well is that they will lump in one diagnosis even if you have multiple. So for example, I can't remember what the stat is I got from a government source, but it's something along the lines of, just loosely, it's like 94% of people who do have a disability, whether it's ADHD or autism, or dyslexia, you have what's called a comorbidity, which is two or more conditions. So you could be ADHD plus dyslexic, you could be autistic plus ADHD, you could have Down syndrome and ADHD, but we only recognize one. And you only see organizations advocating for one. And that's not the case, and that's not the reality. So I wanted to kind of state that as a kind of an overall thing and not dive into, like I said, we can dive into the specifics of each one. I'm not worried about that. But just to kind of make that statement, everything for me and for us and my wife and I, everything started when our son was born. We didn't understand any of this. We had no clue. I wish I could take myself back in time and tell myself it was going to be okay. We had a child that would not go to sleep. We had a child that was always moving, and we could not keep up with him. So at some point we ended up having to change our parenting style entirely, and all the credit goes to my wife because she pointed out that I was doing pretty much everything wrong, which was fantastic. And we ended up coming out with this a much more collaborative approach, and it's taken me years to get to this point. No word of a lie. But when I was dropping a whole bunch of weight at my old job, I would go out for a run at work at lunchtime and then come home, fight traffic, and then I would take my son outside. And initially, what we thought was, hey, maybe we can tire him out, which is about the dumbest thing you can say to a kid who's autistic or has ADHD, because you ain't going to do it. These kids
Yeah.
kids are nuclear powered. There's no way. So we would go outside, and I'm pointing, and I can see it down here. We would run back and forth in our townhouse complex, and we would just race. And that would be it. And we do that for like half hour, 45 minutes. And we realized that his ability to move, those gross motor skills, that was a gift that he has. And it was just a way to it was a way to channel that energy into an activity. And we use that as the basis for emotional regulation, transitions, being able to go from one point to the next without having a break, without having a fight or something like that. And that's how that all started. And that's what I mean by strengths-based parenting. I just happened at the time, my need was to sit there and drop a whole bunch of weight. He has the need to sit there and start moving. So what I needed for me is what he was able to provide for me. It's like this puzzle piece. And it was absolutely wonderful. And we've continued that thing. And you say the word and I'll give you a couple fantastic examples of what we did just to take that even further. But that's how it started.
Well, you offered, so give me a couple of examples.
So, well, the first one that we did, and I'm proud of it because I've got the podcast episode that I did this with. There's the Wall Center, the Sheridan Wall Center downtown Vancouver, where they do where BC Lung Cancer does their climb the wall campaign every year. And so obviously this is pre-COVID, but we went there, and part of the reason we got involved with this was because a family friend of ours, my brother-in-law's best friend, Jeremy passed away at the age of 31 from lung cancer, and it took him in within a year, and that sort of just devastated all of us. He was a fantastic guy, left behind a beautiful wife and beautiful child who was he was young. I want to say he was 6 or 7. I can't remember how old he was. Anyways, it breaks your heart to know that. And we went and we began to do this. And with Owen, I had the idea of, I wonder if I can get him to do this with me. But we were also struggling with transitions and going through all this stuff. And maybe I should just back up and tell you about the stair climb. So the stair climb is the entire wall center. It's all 54 flights of stairs, if I remember correctly. And firefighters go there in full gear. They climb it all, and it's a heck of a thing to undertake, especially if you're not in the best of shape. Owen and I, we were actually in pretty good shape. So we went there, we did it, and I think we did it in about, I have to adjust for the times because we were stopped at the bottom because the door was closed and nobody realized it. So we got hung up for like 5 minutes, which is funny. But we climbed all 54 flights of stairs in like 10 minutes ish after
Wow.
all was said and done. And the best part is he had just turned 5 2 weeks prior. So you've got this 5-year-old that is passing people who are like, oh, that person looks like they're in good shape. They were hurting bad. And this 5-year-old kid and his dad is passing, these people all along the way. And one person's like, how old is your kid? And I'm like, just turned 5. And I'm like, I'm not giving up. I'm just going to keep going. And that's exactly what it was. We did the whole thing. And it was such a tremendous triumph to have that bonding moment, not just because it was just him and I at the time doing it, but for all of us as a family to have completed something like that. I love it. I absolutely love it. But that is, again, that was the bond that we had built up doing all the working out and doing all the running and everything else. There you go. There's playing to his strengths, and ends up being a strength for me too.
Well, and it's nice when those two mesh. What you needed was what your son needed. um and I'm just going to go back and comment that you made it really a clear comment that no person has just a diagnosis, like.
No,
And it's funny because I don't think anybody out there sort of takes the time to peel back the layers. And it's nice to understand, okay, this is this thing, this is that thing. um but it's funny because all of our society lines, fundraising, it's based on this very linear one point in time. And
yes,
it's an interesting thing.
yeah,
Now, let's talk about advocacy, because I feel like, yes, we could talk about ADHD, and I love learning more about my fellow, as I say, neurospicy, thanks to Christina Hooper. I love learning about other pieces of the spectrum and how it all fits in. But I think the piece that's missing for a lot of people is the advocacy. And I had a friend who had 3 children that, the medical community, this was in small town BC, the medical community said, your kids are problem kids. They just kept saying, slow development. And then ultimately they found out that all 3 of them had very severe, um, on the autism spectrum. And it turns out there was some environmental factor from their um, pregnancy that led to this diagnosis. But
oh wow,
they fought for years because everybody wanted to put a different label and nobody wanted to actually say the word autism. So how did you start advocating, and was it for yourself or was it for your son?
no. It was really for everything was really around Owen, and that is what started everything. And by the time we got to his first diagnosis with that private provider that we had contracted, because we thought, hey, let's go through something that's private. We've got some base knowledge and go through that. The experience that we had was less than stellar. And because my wife and I just were we were emotionally, physically, spiritually, you name it, we were wiped. And
Yeah.
we had no idea how to deal with any of what we were dealing with, because we didn't know. And here Owen was 4. But when we went in there, I remember bringing in like a USB with a bunch of videos and stuff, and had no idea what masking was at the time. And I'm like, I want you to look at this information. And she didn't want to look at it. And I was just like, well, look at it if you have time, basically.
Yeah.
But that was the mistake sort of on my part. It should have been, you're going to look at this damn thing. And that wasn't there. That was far from it. When we got that ADHD diagnosis the first time, and we heard those words, we're like, but that doesn't explain this, that doesn't explain that. And then we heard a phrase that a lot of, I know, parents have heard before, which is, well, it might just be too early to tell. Oh, bull. You want to censor me out on that one, by the way?
No, that's good.
Like the line that you hear when somebody says that, oh, it's too early to tell, or there's not enough data. No, pull your head straight out of your butt and look at this. But here's where the valuable advocacy lesson came in. I did not realize that we actually had a ton of tools in the beginning that we didn't tap into. For example, when we were going to his daycare, we would call, if he had a bad night, I'd send an email over to the daycare and say to them, hey, Owen's had a bad night, just keep an eye on him, or something like that. Or this is why he's mad today.
Yeah.
And there was all this kind of stuff, but I didn't think to print that out and bring that with me. I had no idea. What we miss as parents, and what we don't have, is we do not have a framework for discussion with a medical professional. We are beholden to that medical professional to show us, where we might be missing something, if we can even get that sort of clarity. We don't normally have that. We'll fast forward to March of this year. And when we finally got our appointment at BC Children's at Sunnyhill, there was a, I guess, quasi-disclosure is that I'm somewhat of an expert at Microsoft Excel. So I put together this spreadsheet, and it essentially had, a friend of mine gave me some good inspiration too, but it had a breakdown of what's known as the diagnostic manual, which is what is the criteria that you use to diagnose these things. And I took everything for autism, and basically I I had broken it all down out of the big, huge lumping 5 categories that they've got, or 6 categories, whatever it is. And I made them individual things. So if I saw repetitive motions, if I saw, the rigidity, if I saw that, the spreadsheet became this, here's the date that I saw it, here's when we started seeing it. And then I began to list out every single thing for him in his 9 years of being alive to correlate it all within the diagnostic manual. That ended up being, I had to stop at 300 rows because my shoulder, my shoulder actually had an impingement. So I literally could not move my arm anymore. My wife, in addition, had written another 14 pages in Microsoft Word. And so we sent this over to the hospital for the appointment the next day. And the doctor saw this and he goes, I got to commend my staff. Whoever put this form together and all this information, like, they're amazing. And Siobhan, my wife, she just points at me and she's like, it wasn't your staff, it was Mark.
Yeah.
He's like, what? And I told him everything sort of that had happened. And he's just like, he was just floored. But that Excel file what that did was give us the basis for a discussion to know what the things we were seeing, and that we actually weren't quote unquote crazy. Because when you deal with something for the first time and you say, well, they don't meet this criteria in this category or this, well, if you put it all together in a big, huge honking list,
Yep.
let me tell you, you're going to be able to sit there and say, how many examples do you bloody well need? Because I've got 10 and you're asking me for 20?
Yep.
Come on. Like, this is the struggle that parents go through. And this is why I say parents don't have that handbook. They don't have that guide. And it's not the parent's fault. Like you were talking in the beginning about that difference of just quote unquote being different, of thinking differently.
Yep.
Like, this was me being about as full and natural self as I possibly could have, is whipping out a spreadsheet and coming out with something like this. It solved the problem, but I look at that as such a positive thing. That can work out really well. But that's where the advocacy begins, is you want to get beyond just getting somebody's face. It's
Yeah.
not that. You want to, everything that you do it with kindness. As hard as it was, you do it with as much kindness as possible, and you give as much information as you possibly can. And that's right there is the heart of advocacy, because you're taking that need and you're expressing it in a kind way with information that's going to help that person.
And
So
I really love that, and I applaud you. I'm a fan of Excel, so I never once thought of applying
I'll
it to
show
my.
you later.
Mark and I are going to go on a tangent.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I never once thought about applying Excel to my parenting, but now I feel like it's a hole that was missing in my life.
That was where this is partly where my process improvement background came in, as well as my programming background. So yeah.
I love it.
Lean methodology and kata, Toyota kata, is a huge benefit as a parent. Oh, let me tell you. Yes.
Okay, we're gonna have an entire episode just on that conversation, because okay, you opened this can of worms, Mark.
I did.
I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring. I apply the Pareto principle to my parenting.
Yeah.
So everything we do, it's 80-20, and my 10-year-old can tell you what Pareto means.
Yeah.
And he gets exasperated when people are focused on the wrong things. And he's like, no. If you do this 20%, we're done.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So
I had with everything that happened at Sunny Hill, and the short story of that version is the pediatrician's office and Sunny Hill, they basically lost the referral initially. So I had to keep going after our pediatrician's office, and then I had to go after Sunny Hill to make sure that they actually got it. Like, I was in full on my logistics old life mode of why am I the one doing this? But I mean, I did a value stream map, or not a VSM, a process map of how all this stuff works, because it's confusing and it's daunting. But all these tools are so dang useful.
yeah.
Oh, fish! I have. Do you know the Ishikawa, the fishbone?
Yes, I haven't used it much, but
I have a parenting version of that. And I tell you, it was one of the coolest things it's really neat to come up with, and I have yet to do my own podcast on it, but I'll show you that later too.
I love it. I love it. So
yeah.
Fair warning, Mark and I might go on a tangent or two.
This is part one of 20
of 996, I think. And for those listening, you know what you're in for, so welcome to the party. I love the application of management skills to parenting, because quite frankly, I've become a better parent because I've got management skills, but I would say I've become a better leader because I've got parenting skills. I love the overlap, and I feel like there's a spreadsheet that justifies things. Yeah, that's hilarious. But
well,
I think that's
the big core thing with leadership skills is making sure that you're I was going to say person-centered, but human-centered,
Oh,
right? You do it with the person in mind. It's not about barking an order.
yeah.
And any manager who comes along and thinks that they're, the king's throne or what have you, like, you're not a leader, dude. Go
Yeah.
somewhere else. You got to do it with the person in mind. You have to do it with kindness.
Well, and I love your approach to advocacy, because if you think about, the medical community, especially with the world after COVID, I have a family doctor I went to visit last week, and I can say that man is on the verge of giving up. He's been overworked, he's exhausted. People don't want to have to reach for things if you can help them
Yeah.
understand. And I love that you actually, I can't wait to see that spreadsheet, because tying the diagnoses to the actual behavior, the occurrences, the events, most of the diagnosis is about observation and data. You can't get that in a 15-minute doctor visit, or
No, 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 you can't. And if to take this even further, if you think about a value stream map or a process map, one of the big questions that we end up asking is, what's the task that we're working on? But, what is value? How is value defined? And what are I mean, yes, we know about overall value. Maybe we're building a widget or something like that, or we're doing a service. But if you're asking, because I used to do this at my old logistics job as well, I broke it down in the same way, is the information that you're sending me is value in some form. I mean, if you want to sit there and argue what's non-value added or what's value and what's waste, that's the whole other thing. Just for simplicity's sake, it's value that comes over to you. But if you have to manipulate this spreadsheet 10 ways to Sunday, and it just wastes an hour of your time, well, I'll pick up the phone and call such and such and say, when you send me that spreadsheet, humble inquiry, right? What are you having to do to get that information? Is that just the raw data, or are you having to format and do all this?
yeah,
And as soon as they realize that they don't have to do all that work, oh, if you just send me the raw information, I mean, that could save them hours.
yeah,
But we don't think of a process like that at all. And anywhere, very
yeah,
few places I've ever come across do. And that is where you take that principle and you apply it to the medical side, and you say, what's the information that they're looking for on this such and such? And we as parents don't necessarily know those things.
yeah,
It takes someone like yourself or myself or whatever to create and come up with those guides. I'm happy that, I do want to turn that spreadsheet into an app, because I know it'll be really damn useful for so many families that struggle with this.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it's you have to know where that value is coming from and what's important and what's the actual information that they need.
yeah,
Otherwise you can't really help fix the process, so to speak. You're still that bystander.
yeah,
And I'm not trying, and I'm not advocating for micromanaging. It's not about micromanage. It's not about that. It's really about what is the other person doing to get you the information that you do need.
yeah,
That's it, right? And that ultimately, hey, you make that person's life easier, your life becomes easier, the next person down the line becomes easier, because then I say, oh, maybe Barb in accounting needs this piece. Can I take this spreadsheet and move it around so you can bill everything in a certain way?
yeah.
Oh, let's do that then. There it is.
I love it. And we talked about the bullet journal before we started recording. I just want to share this with you. As you're developing your app, one of my son's classmates was very severe type 1 diabetes. His mom actually created a little journal, and every day she'd make notes, and the teacher would make notes, and the journal went with that kid everywhere.
Yeah.
So there was real time data, so that nothing was dropped. And it just, if you have special needs, part of advocacy is collecting the data that people need to help you. Is that
And
a
it's the
fair
hardest
statement?
part. Yeah, it's the hardest part.
Yeah, and she was worried he was going to lose it, but every day, when he came home from school, she'd take a picture, she'd upload it to an online hard drive. But it was a beautiful thing because the doctors could make really good decisions.
Yeah.
They tracked his food, they tracked his blood sugar, they tracked his mood. Um, you know, um, One of his side effects was extreme hyperactivity, followed by extreme, I'm gonna say comatose, like, he just literally freeze,
Wow.
and it was just, they realized it was the patterns in his blood sugar.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because taking that kind of a guide, that kind of a journal, you're also you're knowing what the value is and what
Mhm.
in the columns of data that you're looking for. Like you said, it tracked his food, his mood, his blood sugar. And when you're a medical professional and you're looking at that information, that's no different than what we gave the doctor of here's the historical representation of everything about our son. And we're like, this is, this is his value.
Yeah,
This is how we figure out the answer to this question. And this is what leads to this. And it becomes a much more um I want to say global, more global discussion,
yeah.
universal almost, much more. So,
Well, and I love the idea of, from an advocacy point of view of documenting, and I don't pretend that everybody's got Mark's Excel skills. I'm going to
oh,
assume that most people don't, but just little things like having a journal or a diary or some, an app on your phone where you make some notes. Because in the moment, when you're in emergency and they're asking you what's going on,
oh yeah,
our brains aren't conditioned to remember in stress. We're in full on panic mode. It's good to be able to hand somebody something and say, so if somebody's new to this world where they're having to step into the role of advocate, my advice is start taking notes, find a way to track it that makes sense. If you're artistic, draw pictures. If you love Excel, create a spreadsheet. What advice would you give to some new parent who's just learning, they're at the beginning of the journey?
well, one thing I love, which I'll touch on first, because I just wrote down two things that really came to mind. You said draw a picture. One thing that I think we really suffer from in schools is that we teach children wrong, and for that matter, we work wrong as well. I think, um, and by that I mean you talked about drawing pictures. Why is drawing pictures any less valid of a form of communication than handwriting or typing?
Yeah.
It's not. If I take my iPhone and as even another example, Owen's DCD, he struggles with DCD is developmental coordination disorder, which is also known as dyspraxia. Long story. Um, the his fine motor skills for writing, if you were to see his handwriting at grade 2, would be like, oh wow, that's you couldn't read it. Not to mention he's dyslexic as well. So the he's much improved in the span of a year and a half, but why should a kid be punished because they can't physically write
Yeah.
when I could take text to speech on an iPad and speak the answer, or have somebody scribe his thoughts for somebody to have him keep up with the class?
Yeah.
So those modes and methods that you have for making something that is um, for making it work, don't limit yourself. That's number one. If it's a picture that you need, great. If it's blocks that you need, if it's Lego, I don't doesn't matter. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Um, the other two things that really make it that hit me is to make it accessible, and not just to you, but you want to make it accessible to the audience that it's for. In other words, when I ask you, I know there's that whole definition about communication, and it's two people that do whatever. Honest to God, Jeff, if I'm sitting there and I need a piece of information and I'm asking you, you know what, I'm going to word this in such a way that you understand what I'm asking for. And that might have to require me to get out of my head and get into your head to say, how does Jeff want that? That's the accessibility piece. And I would say, make it easy. Make it as easy as you can. Also be gentle on yourself. Think of as few steps as possible as you need to record that information. And you have to be willing to define what value is and what is the easiest way to capture that value that you know. Because my way, as you already said, my way is not going to be your way, right? It's not going to be somebody else's way. It's going to be very different. That's the kind of the basic advice I would have, is as far as that sort of thing goes.
I love it.
And and finally, I'll say it again, because I will die on this hill. Be kind. Be
Yes.
kind, because this is not, you're mad at a process, you're frustrated at a process, you're frustrated at bureaucracy, you're not frustrated at the person.
I love it. So that's some great advice. Now, Mark, if people want to get to know you and follow you, what's the best way for them to connect with you and learn more about the amazing things you're doing?
Thanks, Jeff. The first one I'll give you is the podcast. So you can look up We Are the ADHD Family. The Advocateurs is something that I'm tacking on to the end of it, because it's the idea of an advocator is, you've got a raconteur, which is a storyteller, and you've got an advocate. And an advocate does an excellent job at telling stories. So I combine the two, and that's why I call it the Advocateurs. But I'm not putting that in the title, but just look up We Are the ADHD Family. And then you can look up my name, just look up Mark Smeets. You'll find it iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google, Amazon, pretty much all these places. I'd say LinkedIn's a fantastic place to find me. You can just find me under, I think I'm under Mr. Mark Smeets. I put the Mr. in there. You can find me on, actually, you can find the podcast on Facebook as well, just facebook.com / or whatever the slash is, We Are the ADHD Family. I just made an Instagram page, and that's basically the best ways to do it.
I love it. And for the listeners, we'll have it in the show notes as well, so they can just easily, quickly connect. Now, Mark, before we wrap up, you are the expert at you. Is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't?
Oh, no. Oh, wow.
In episode 1 of
Episode
996.
199. Yeah, pretty much. Well, we didn't talk about music, but that's okay. Yeah, you could ask me my favorite band. No, you know what? I'd say my advice for, I'd say, here's what I would say for a question that you kind of hit on loosely, but I'll just say it. Being an advocate can be lonely, and just like being a parent can be lonely, and all that. Who you are is who you are. Celebrate those things, and recognize what makes you, quote unquote, different is really what makes you special and makes you a powerhouse. It's taken me 48 years to realize this at this point in my life, and I'm really grateful for my son being who he is, and that opportunity that I have now to help make things better. Because, again, realizing what my strengths are, and realizing that I can use my own ADHD as a strength, even though there are days where I'm just all over the place. You are special, and even if you don't have a disability, as much as we were just talking about that earlier, if you're not in that neurodivergence world, don't think that you're not missing out. You are just as special as well. You're You're an amazing person, and quite honestly, I wish people had told me a long time ago, you're doing enough, and you are enough.
I love it. I
Yeah,
love it. And I think that's, be kind applies to ourselves as well as to
big,
others. So,
yeah, big time.
well,
Big.
Mark, I really had some fun today and I learned a lot. So thank you for taking the time to hang out with me today.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for inviting me on, and I hope this is the first of many. And yeah, this is fantastic. And if anybody's got questions, hey, if you've got a situation, I don't mind the questions. Reach out to me on one of those things, and you feel free to pick my brain.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to either click the link below or scan the QR code to register and listen to other episodes of our podcast. Or if you think your business or you would be a great guest to be on our show, we're always looking for experts in one of the 9 elements of holistic wellness. We'd love to have you. You can either click the link below or you can scan the QR code and complete our speaker intake form. Thank you, and to your wellness.